Competitive Fortnite has always had this really interesting balancing act. On one side is a game built on mechanics, positioning, decision making, and hitting a fat triple edit one pump and shouting bang! But on the other side, it's robots, mythic swords, anime skins, and the 6-7 emote. When these two overlap, they create moments which completely break competitive Fortnite tournaments. And not all of them are as obvious as the Mechs or the Infinity Blade. Some of them are as simple as the common grenade. When people think about grenades today, they usually think of a useless item. 40 damage, awkward timing, and impossible to actually hit players with. But grenades were not always like that. In the early days of competitive Fortnite, grenades were one of the most broken items ever allowed in tournaments, and it came down to one part of them: the structure damage. For years, grenades dealt 375 damage to builds and 100 damage to players. That meant that a single grenade could instantly destroy any wood or brick structure. Since they're a common item with a massive stack size, they're also frequently abused. Despite being in the game since its release, it took around 2 years for players to figure out that you could just line up grenades at around 60 to 75 meters and they would instantly explode on impact. Now, if one player threw a grenade, it would break the box, but if multiple players threw them, the first would destroy the builds and then the rest would detonate directly on the player inside, killing them. By Chapter 2, Season 1's Squad FNCS Finals, this became just the full-blown meta. Entire teams were just carrying stacks of grenades and just deleting other teams in the blink of an eye. You couldn't outbuild it, you couldn't hold your walls. Your only counter really was to sit inside of your cone, but it's not like this was actually a counter. The thing is, this wasn't even enough to get the grenades removed, and what actually forced Epic's hands was a bug. Players discovered that by spamming the click button, you could throw multiple grenades at once. Even more crazy, by binding the throw button to scroll wheel, you could throw an entire inventory of 30 grenades in an instant, causing 3,000 damage. Now, the person who found this out was my editor, Nolar. My boy hooked this up and ruined the grenades, so you can all thank him for getting these removed from competition. Because of this exploit, grenades were temporarily removed from the game for 2 weeks. And historically, this is where Epic Games would normally do what they always did, which is like, we rebalance the item across every playlist, reintroduce it, and then it's just awful for the casuals and kind of just mid for the competitive players. But this time, they kept the item out of competitive entirely, only nerfing it to its current state years later in mid-Chapter 4. But this isn't the only grenade that's had a massive negative impact on Fortnite tournaments. Now, you all know what shockwaves do. They're a mobility item that sends you flying across the map, and worst of all for competitive players, breaks your builds, and that's what makes them so dangerous. Shockwaves are tied to some of the most iconic moments in Fortnite history. Metro shockwaving himself down onto low ground to win the Game of Summer skirmish, Bugha's Game 1 World Cup height retake, and even an entire FNCS season where Mongrel, Metro, and Tayson were able to win because of the shockwave heavy meta. They create some interesting plays that are very fun to watch, but their problem is that every single tournament you would get griefed by a player destroying your builds, knocking you out in an endgame, or just having a free elim run away from you because their inventory's full of 30 shockwaves. They're literally a get out of jail free card, and it's no surprise that even more casual players who mainly just play pubs have also been arguing a lot about these lately. They're incredibly unhealthy for the game, and it took Epic Games almost 4 years to remove them from tournaments. But the thing is, not every single item needs to break your builds to completely ruin the meta, and the storm flip is a great example of that. Throw it into the safe zone, it becomes the storm. Throw it into the storm, and that becomes the safe zone. Originally, it dealt the same damage as the storm itself, meaning in the moving zones, players inside of this would take 10 damage per second. If you look at the size of it, it was absolutely massive. It was like a stink bong nuke on the whole lobby. And when multiple storm flips were thrown in endgame, it was literally impossible to tell what was safe and what wasn't, so half of the lobby just died. One of the key fundamentals of endgame is knowing where you're rotating. You're going from one place to the other, and the storm flip completely ruined all of that. In this scrim, Shinken got 13 eliminations in one single storm flip just by throwing it down from height. The timing of this item being implemented in the game couldn't have been worse either, as the storm flip was added just before week 9 of the World Cup qualifiers. Thankfully, Epic Games realized the disaster that it would cause and disabled it for that week and kept it out of events as they tried to nerf it and then reintroduce it later. But eventually, Epic Games just admitted this item was too broken and made it the first item to be excluded from tournaments and kept in the rest of the loot pool. But the Stormflip wasn't the first time that Epic openly admitted that an item couldn't be fixed and wasn't fit for competitive, because the Infinity Blade had one of the shortest lifespans of any item ever added to the game. Not only was this one of the most broken items ever, it was also added similarly to the Stormflip at the worst possible time. The Infinity Blade was added the morning of the Winter Royale semi-finals in 2018, which at the time was the largest open tournament Fortnite had ever hosted at a $1 million prize pool. One blade spawned in every single game at Polar Peak, and it took 5 seconds to pull from the pedestal. Now, if you got it, you instantly gained 200 health and 200 shield, which regenerated over time. It also had 2 attacks that dealt 75 damage and broke literally every build. Entire lobbies started landing at Polar Peak in this cup, with only obviously one player coming out with a blade. Sam's run with his blade is still one of the most infamous clips in competitive history, as he just jumps through every single build in the endgame, eliminating player after player after player. What most people don't realize about this clip though is that this happened in the semi-finals and not the finals, and by the time the finals rolled around, players had already started to come up with counters, and somehow those counters were the planes. Since so many players were landing at Polar Peak, players like Rote would land on a nearby plane and just spam anyone trying to grab the blade during its 5-second pickup animation, giving himself some free elimination points. Other players who landed at different planes would just fly all the way up to sky limit and just pretend to fight each other just by shooting and missing over and over, which I love the fact that the broadcast actually showed this. So they flew up as high as possible, basically to just stay out of the way of the blade, and obviously other players shooting them too. The Infinity Blade lasted 3 days before Epic Games removed it from every playlist, and in those 3 days, you would think the Epic Games would learn a bit of a lesson. So you probably shouldn't just drop instant win condition items into tournaments and expect the skill to matter and players to be happy. But this video wouldn't be very interesting if that was true. Nothing else has ruined the love for the game quite like the mechs. These weren't technically an item, but they were worse than any item we've talked about so far, and there's absolutely no way I'm not bringing them up in this video. The missiles broke builds instantly, and the turrets just shredded players. If you saw a mech coming your way, like, it was literally just over. And for some of the best players in the world, this cost them a lot of money. In Season X, FNCS, Mongrel, Beater, and Benchfishy were by far the most dominant trio in Europe. Across the qualifiers, they placed second, first, and first, and then went on to also win their heat. Do you know how much this earned them? $134,400. They were the clear favorites to win the entire event, but in the grand finals, Kiriachi, Fremok, and Kong repeatedly pushed them, griefing them off spawn at Retail Row. Now, this wasn't because of their smart strat, their rotations, their better aim, better fighting, but a lot of times just because they had a mech. MMB ended up coming 10th in the grand finals, earning $3,200 each, when first place was $165,000 per player. Now, them not winning wasn't 100% just because of the mechs, but this definitely cost them a lot of money. This wasn't just frustrating for pros, it completely killed momentum for competitive Fortnite as a whole. The World Cup had just happened the season prior, and interest in competitive Fortnite was an all-time high. I remember being more motivated than ever. Then, I remember loading into a game and I had to play against this, man. What is this? To this day, some of the most upvoted posts on r/Fortnite competitive are still about the mechs almost 7 years later. That's how bad it was. But don't worry, guys. Epic Games added a counter to the mechs, the Junk Rift. Now, the goal here was that you'd throw this on a mech and it would destroy it, but the mechs could just move out of the way of that. So instead, people were just throwing this on builds, and it destroyed every single build until it hit the ground, dealing 200 damage to any player it hit as well. So somehow, Epic Games had responded to an uncounterable vehicle by adding an uncounterable item. Right. Honestly, vehicles have been pretty poorly balanced for competitive across the whole lifespan of the game. And for the last few years, cars have been disabled in competitive modes. I think that's mainly because in Chapter 3, trucks just became the meta because it could just drive through every build. Come on! But it wasn't just items that were unfairly breaking builds. There's a lot of weapons that did the exact same thing. The hand cannon nowadays might feel like a slow, clunky weapon, but back in Chapter 1, it was one of the most overpowered guns Fortnite had ever seen. Early Fortnite was still very much in its experimental phase. Epic Games hadn't really figured out weapon balance yet, and one of them they absolutely had not figured out yet was structure damage. In patch 6.20, Epic Games increased the hand cannon structure damage from 79 and 83 all the way up to 150 and 157. To add to this, a few months earlier in patch 4.3, they'd completely removed any damage drop-off to structures with the hand cannon. That meant that at any range, the hand cannon could one-shot a fully built wood wall, break brick in 2 shots, and wipe out metal in 3. This is barely a year after Fortnite's release, and most players, including pros, were honestly terrible. Most players didn't know how to replace walls, hold builds, or even react properly under pressure. So you could literally just walk up to someone's box, shoot it once with a hand cannon, and immediately pump the player inside. But what made this weapon even more broken was how legacy aim assist worked back then. When you aimed down sights, there was a small snap-on effect, and I'll be honest, calling it small is very generous generous, but if your crosshair was anywhere near an opponent and you ADS'd, you just drag directly to them. You know how broken it was when players as bad as me were abusing this? So in close range, you could do this to either double pump or to just walk into players' boxes by destroying their builds, and at long range, you could hit really easy high damage shots. Eventually, the structure damage was nerfed, but this meant that this was breaking the meta for like 4 months. And could you imagine how broken this would be now that players actually know how to box fight? But this definitely exposed how broken high structure damage weapons could be if they were not properly balanced. And instead of learning from that mistake, Epic Games made something even worse: the heavy sniper. It didn't just damage builds, it was literally designed to delete them. In the gold rarity, it dealt 1,100 structure damage, which meant that you could one-shot literally any structure. Even worse, players learned how to time a heavy sniper shot with an RPG, letting the rocket explode inside another player's box. Or you could double snipe where you're both carrying heavy snipers and one shot would destroy the wall and the second one would hit the player. There was literally nothing more tilting than playing an entire game perfectly, only to have someone just delete your wall and end your tournament in a split second. What made the heavy sniper especially frustrating was that Epic truly never really nerfed it, unlike the hand cannon, and honestly, that was kind of by design. The entire point of the heavy sniper was that it broke builds. It's heavy. That's the point. If they nerf the structure damage, they might as well just vault it and just bring back the bolt action. Most snipers are broken because you can end your game in a single headshot, but the heavy sniper just really needed a body shot to do so. If you look back at game 1 of the World Cup, Booga got a body shot snipe to kill someone that clutched him a crucial refresh here. And that's because most players in Chapter 1 were just running around with pots and pans because the loot pool was so spread out and it was impossible to actually get up to 200 HP. So a heavy sniper that does 150 or 157 body shot just one-shots a huge amount of players in the lobby. The heavy sniper was added in August of 2018, and it wasn't first vaulted until Chapter 2 over a year later, which meant that during the Winter Royale, World Cup qualifiers, World Cup finals, and even the Season X FNCS and all the huge prize pool tournaments that season, your entire tournament run could just end with one shot through a wall. It was actually still prevalent in a lot of Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, so it took almost 4 years for Epic Games to actually finally remove this from competitive playlists. And you think by Chapter 4 that Epic would know better, that they probably shouldn't add a weapon that just deletes any build in a single shot, but they added the heisted breacher shotgun. Now this was an exotic that was obtainable throughout the holo chest in Chapter 4, and despite its 759 structure damage, it did have a mechanism to balance it. Since the shotgun only shot a single pellet, you had to aim down sights in order for it to be 100% accurate. Unsurprisingly, this didn't balance out at all, and after dying to this gun for an entire chapter, I'm very happy to say that it never returned to the game. Now, a category of weapon that has quietly broken competitive Fortnite multiple times is spray weapons. Most shooter games are built around assault rifles, but Fortnite, at least in build mode, is fundamentally a shotgun game. Its entire skill loop revolves around peaks, edits, timings, reset, and hitting a big bang. So whenever a meta emerges where players stop carrying shotguns altogether, something is definitely wrong. The drum gun was first added in patch version 4.5, and it was insanely broken. In the blue rarity, it dealt 27 damage with a fire rate of 9 shots per second. Now, current SMGs have a damage per second of around 180, but this OG drum gun was 243. Back then, weapons also had a headshot multiplier of 2 times, and it felt insanely easy to hit shots with this gun too because of its large reticule. Now, don't forget, this also had a magazine size of 50. This is literally the most brain-dead weapon of all time. You just aim it near someone and it's just shredded. Thankfully, this was vaulted around 2 months later, and I think we can all agree that this was a good thing. But this is Season 5. There wasn't really any tournaments then. Well, that's because during the unvaulting event, the community had to choose to unvault one item. There were 6 options: bouncers, drum gun, grappler, the infinity blade, planes, and the tactical submachine gun. Now, honestly, all of these options kind of suck outside of the bouncers, which, let's be real, the casual audience are not going to vote for. So, unsurprisingly, they unvaulted the drum gun.
Yo, everyone's hitting the drum gun. No one's on the bouncer. Hey, come over here, you bots.
But yet again, the timing of this was incredibly bad, as this was right before week 5 of the World Cup qualifiers. And unsurprisingly, this is also a week that Lecce, the controller player, won. So the week after this, they nerfed it by 4 damage per shot, reducing its damage per second by 17%. But this is too little too late. If you played week 5 of the solo qualifiers, you know just how frustrating this weapon truly was. But that's not the only time this has happened. Chapter 3 felt like Fortnite was actively trying to not be a shotgun-based game. Instead of fights revolving around peaks, edits, resets, the meta shifted just towards running straight into players' boxes with SMGs and overwhelming them with pure pressure. In Season 1, Epic added the Stinger SMG, a weapon with a damage per second of around 240, almost identical to the original drum gun before its nerf, and when you pair that with the MK7 assault rifle for mid and long range, there was almost no reason to carry a shotgun at all, especially when the shotgun this season was relatively weak before it got buffed. Hen's FNCS winning clutch with Queasy is a perfect example of this. For almost the entire game, he didn't even need a shotgun. He only picked one up when it came down to the final 1v1 of the final match, and that alone tells you just how bad this loot pool balance is. But instead of stepping away from that design, the next season Epic Games doubled down. The Stinger was nerfed, but only to make room for a more broken SMG, the Combat SMG, unsurprisingly with a damage per second of 240. Chapter 3 had a very frustrating meta that abandoned all of the core aspects that made fighting fun and enjoyable, and it was mainly just because these SMGs ruined it. But there have been other items that broke Fortnite's fundamentals in different ways than this. The Storm Scout Sniper is a weapon that, when you aim down sights, shows you exactly where the next zone is going to pull. In a competitive game which is entirely built around getting to good positions, making good rotations, and damaging other players, knowing where all the zones are is not a small advantage, it's quite literally game winning. Unsurprisingly, like all of the best items in Fortnite's history, the Storm Scout was first added in Season X, but surprisingly it wasn't actually added to competitive until Chapter 2 Season 5. If you spoke to the NPC Maeve at Shipwreck's Cove, you could buy it for 500 gold bars. Now, unlike in public matches, bars reset at the start of every tournament match, so 500 was incredibly difficult to obtain. In a tournament environment, only a few teams could realistically afford it and then actually reach it safely and before any other team, and the main one was the team who was landing at Weeping Woods. By breaking every bed and couch and opening every chest and then completing NPC quests in tournaments, they could consistently buy the Storm Scout almost every single game. Basically, the team landing Weeping Woods was the only team capable of knowing where every single zone was pulling. It took Epic nearly 2 months to finally remove the Storm Scout from competitive playlists, but for some reason they just added the exact same functionality back to the game a few years later. In Chapter 5, Forecast Towers were added as a mid-game objective, which in theory balances it out. If it's so good, lots of teams will fight for it, and it's kind of high risk, high reward. But in high-level play, for the most part, this was actually just lame. Who actually claimed the tower a lot of the times just came down to whoever got there first, as other teams just didn't want to grief their game trying to close the gap and then taking a long fight just for this benefit. These towers were a crucial part of Peterbot and Poyo's insane run over the year of 2024, and it was particularly important in how they won the FNCS Global Championship. Since they knew where every next zone was going to be, they rotated up on top of Loot Island and would use either the Flowberry Fizz combined with a launch pad or the rift below a few seconds before the 6th zone was about to appear. Since they had forecast, when the 6th zone appeared, they actually knew when the 7th zone appeared, and since they were flying high up in the sky, they could then choose the best spot to land at in this zone. Since they're up on the island before, they essentially skipped 2 or 3 entire rotations just using this, and got to this spot early, meaning they could beam anyone who was trying to rotate there late. They were obviously the best team in the lobby, but having much more information than every other team played a massive part in their success this year. Thankfully, while Forecast did return to public matches in Chapter 6, it never made its way back to tournaments because it was extremely unfair to have a small handful of teams know exactly where every zone was going to pull. And thankfully, over the last few years, Epic Games has drawn a hard line between the casual and the competitive Fortnite loot pools, giving the casuals the fun stuff and keeping all that broken stuff out of tournaments. If you enjoyed the video, please like down below and subscribe to the channel, and if you want to watch more, you can click on this video on screen to see how Peterbot and Poyo dominated the year of 2025 and won the FNCS Global Championship.